It's very kind of you to help, Mr. Watkins. As I think I said, I must get this article on the taking of blood out by Monday. And frankly, well, it's a subject about which I know absolutely nothing.
Yes, I see. Well, I think perhaps the best thing I can do is to show you a film strip on the historical side of bloodletting, and then see if our pathologist, Dr. Johnson, can come up and have a chat with you on present-day practice.
Well, yes, that would be grand. Did you say Johnson?
Yeah.
I think I know him. Dear chap with glasses and a moustache.
Yes, that's right. Hello? Hello, Johnson. It's Watkins here. I've got a Mr. Carr with me, looking for information on bloodletting and phlebotomy. Incidentally, he thinks he knows you. Yes. Yes, that's right, that's him. Well, I'm going to show him a film strip now, and I wondered if you could come up in a few minutes and put him right on current practice. You will? Oh, splendid. Thanks so much. He remembers you quite well. He's coming up soon. Meanwhile, let's start off on the historical end.
Splendid. You know, writing this article was rather getting me down.
I shall be ready in a moment. Would you mind turning the lights off?
Sure.
Now, this film strip covers bloodletting and phlebotomy, or venesection, from very early times. It's been practiced in one form or another for centuries, and has only ceased being used as a sort of universal panacea within the memory of the older living physicians. It's still used by primitive people, and its underlying principle was to open a vein or scarify the skin deeply near an affected part. For both purposes, the primitive man used thorns, flints or fleams, sometimes made from a shark's tooth on a wooden handle like this one. The first refinement in venesection was probably a bronze fleam of very similar appearance. Certainly the Romans were using fleams consisting of a double-edged tooth-shaped blade of bronze attached to a handle in the first 2 centuries A.D. Examples were found at Pompeii, together with a bronze cupping vessel like this, and a number of other instruments, also of bronze. Various modifications of the fleam were used during the centuries, but the shape of the blade changed very little, as you can see from this 17th century example. A double-edged scalpel or lancet was apparently developing concurrently with the fleam, because Caxton described a lancet in 1494. Lancets reached their final form in the 17th century. They were usually carried in the surgeon's waistcoat pocket in sets of 2 to 6, in flat leather, silver or shagreen cases. This particular set, as a matter of fact, was actually used by Baron Dimsdale to vaccinate Catherine the Great in 1768, indicating another use for lancets.
Very interesting, but trifle unhygienic, wasn't it?
Yes, sepsis was pretty common. However, when the practice of bloodletting reached its zenith in the 17th and 18th centuries, they became more mechanically minded, and the scarifier was introduced. As you see, it consists of a metal box with from 6 to 16 trigger-operated blades which produce incisions to a required depth. It was used for cutting the skin, not the veins, you know. This example belonged to Lord Lister himself.
What a savage-looking weapon. I'm glad it's out of date.
Yes, it is a bit fearsome, isn't it? As a matter of fact, I've got another 19th century instrument here, if you'd like to have a look at it.
I should indeed.
Well, there it is. There are 2 scarifiers and a spirit lamp. It's made of silver, and it belonged to a Dr. Atkinson of Brighton.
How does it work?
Well, that's quite simple. You just set the trigger, like that, and then you place it into position, press the button, and there you are. The blades come down so quickly you can hardly see them. Actually, they look like this.
Ooh, very unpleasant.
Well, if that's how you feel, I have an even more horrific specimen here, which you'll like.
Great Scott, what a contraption.
Yes, it's called a phlebotomy bow. the cutting edge being shot straight into the vein like an arrow. It was used in Malta and Greece, but perhaps, not unnaturally, it doesn't seem to have become very popular.
Well, I must say I'm glad I didn't live in those days.
That's all right. All through this long period, special vessels were used for receiving the blood drawn. Come in. Ah.
Hope I'm not too early.
Not a bit, my dear fellow. Sit down a minute. We're very nearly finished. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. Primitive races used rough earthenware collecting bowls and coconut shells for the blood. But hand bowls of beaten metal or glazed earthenware, roughly similar in shape to this 18th century example, appear to have been used by the barber surgeons of the Middle Ages. Pewter bowls, like this, came into use in the 17th century, while in Italy, rare Venetian glass vessels were sometimes used and became family heirlooms. The next step in evolution was obviously to combine the scarifier and the receiving vessel. No doubt there were many attempts which have not survived, but one ingenious instrument has come down to us in this so-called artificial leech of 1850, in which the left-hand cylinder houses the trigger-operated blades and the right-hand one a syringe-type piston for sucking out the blood. This was followed in 1854 by the first all-glass syringe invented by Ferguson, the instrument maker, and used by Dr. Wood of Edinburgh. It embodied the first hollow hypodermic needle. The Wood syringe, of course, is the direct ancestor of our modern syringes, and as it rarely finishes the historical side, I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Johnson.
Well, I'll certainly do what I can.
Splendid. Would you mind turning on the lights?
Yes, certainly. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Watkins. That's been most helpful.
Not a bit.
How are you, Doctor? Nice to see you again. Can you really spare the time to give me a present-day picture of, what do you call it, phlebotomy?
Yes, of course I can. I'll try and give you a thumbnail sketch of the whole setup. Well, I think I can't do better than take you, in imagination, over to my path lab to begin with, and then down to the consulting room.
Oh, that'll be grand. It should give me all the information I want.
Well, you ended up historically on Wood's syringe. It was rather primitive, but it worked. And by 1896, all glass syringes were being made in some numbers. These, of course, are entirely modern. In 1906, the composite metal and glass type was evolved. It was an advance on contemporary glass syringes and is still widely used. A later modification was a syringe in which the metal parts were made of alloy to avoid damage during heat sterilization. Syringes remain probably the most commonly used tool for the taking of blood. They are easy to hold, the quantity of blood withdrawn can be measured, and they can, of course, be used for injections as well.
Yes, they certainly look less vicious than that old crossbow thing.
True enough. Now we come to the Wassermann needle, which, as you see, consists of a short rubber tube attached to a needle. They are easy to clean and store, but as they are rather tricky to hold, they are seldom used except in laboratories and clinics handling large numbers of venipunctures. A more modern development is this vacuum tube, or venule, which is easy to handle, has its own needle, and ensures a sterile blood sample. After use, you simply file off the needle-carrying part, and there's your sample ready to be sent off wherever you like. There's another apparatus working on the same vacuum principle, this bottle arrangement. It's used for obtaining larger quantities of blood, as you would from blood donors or polycythemics. The bulb is for extracting the air.
Well, that's all quite clear, but what is all this bloodletting mostly wanted for nowadays?
Oh, for a great variety of pathological examinations. For instance, serological tests, for which we need clotted blood. The man over there, by the way, is doing a Wassermann. Here you see serum and clot in ordinary lab test tubes, and here in some of those venule tubes you saw earlier. Other serum tests include the Vidal for the enteric group of infections, the Paul Bunnell for glandular fever, and, of course, most of the chemical tests. However, if you want to examine whole blood, i.e. unclotted blood, an anticoagulant is necessary in the tube. Sodium oxalate is the commonest nowadays, for example, when doing blood urea tests. When it comes to cell counts, hemoglobin estimations, and blood sedimentation rates, we use a mixture of potassium and ammonium oxalate, called Wintrobe, to prevent clotting, or a substance called heparin. The advantage of heparin is that it does not distort the cells or break up blood parasites in the sample. In the laboratory we have, for example, small Wintrobe tubes with the anticoagulant already into which the blood has to be put immediately after taking. If you are using venule tubes, the appropriate anticoagulant is already in the tube itself, so that you don't have to transfer the blood into another container. For instance, this is a Wintrobe venule. This contains heparin. This sodium fluoride, and this sodium oxalate. Rather convenient when you're busy. Bacterial culture is another thing we need blood for. It's rather a tricky business to catch the particular organisms you're looking for in the comparatively small quantity of blood being drawn at any one time. So you may need to take several samples. Here is a blood culture in glucose broth from a pyrexial case taken with a syringe. Here is another culture in a special type of venule also containing glucose broth.
Well, now you have filled me up with facts, but you've still not said a word yet on how you take blood.
Steady on, I'm coming to that now. In the consulting room is an expectant mother who has come for her routine rhesus test. First comes the choice of the vein. In this case, and in general, the most obvious and the easiest is one of the basilic veins, although sometimes one has to look elsewhere. Then, of course, you've got to obstruct the venous return. A blood pressure cuff is useful here. With this inflated and the patient in a good light, with the arm fully extended, the vein is easily palpated even if deep. Or it may be made to stand out by milking the forearm towards the tourniquet, or by making a fist, or gently tapping over the vein. The skin is now prepared with iodine, or methylated spirit, and, taking note of the direction of the vein, the left hand grips the forearm 3 or 4 inches below the selected point of entry. The thumb exerts firm traction on the skin, thereby steadying the vein. The needle, bevel uppermost, must first obtain a purchase in the skin. It is then thrust firmly into the vein. to digress for a moment. The technique with a Wassermann needle is exactly similar, but it needs practice. Digressing still further, I should add that venipuncture with this venule device is extremely simple. The glass sheath is filed off, revealing a sterile needle. The technique is virtually the same as in the case of the syringe, but a simple manipulation of the instrument causes the vacuum to suck the blood into the tube. But to return to our original patient. After an adequate quantity of blood has been taken, the tourniquet is released. The needle is withdrawn and the puncture sealed by firm pressure with a swab. After use, you have to use cold water for washing. Otherwise, the blood clots, especially at the juncture between metal and glass. Next, the syringes are dipped first in alcohol, then in ether, or in acetone alone, both to dry them and to remove any residual stickiness. After this, they are sterilized. To do this efficiently is a bit of a job. This paper, published by the Medical Research Council during the war, drew attention to some of the dangers of inadequate sterilization. It is the usual thing to boil syringes in water, but if you are going to use them afterwards for injection, as opposed to withdrawal of blood, you may find yourself passing on all sorts of unpleasant things, like cellulitis, abscesses, gas gangrene, or even infectious hepatitis, unless you boil them for a long time. Another method, which is considered reasonably safe, though it does not destroy spores or viruses, is the use of 75% methylated spirits for 10 minutes. In a laboratory like this, where we use a lot of syringes, we dry sterilize them. The syringes are assembled in stoppered test tubes, and the needles are similarly treated. The test tubes are placed in metal baskets in the dry sterilizer. They are sterilized for 1 hour at 160 degrees centigrade, a method which is 100% efficient. Of course, all these precautions are unnecessary with the venule tube, because the thing is only used once and is sterile from the word go.
Yes, that vacuum arrangement does seem to have its advantages. Tell me, how does it actually work?
That's easy. The venule is ingenious enough, but perfectly simple. It consists of a vacuum tube body, the vacuum of which is maintained by a rubber bung. Through the bung passes a glass tube, in which is sealed a sterile needle enclosed in a glass sheath. As the rubber is elastic and the needle-carrying tube passes through it at an angle, the inner end of the tube is held tightly against its seating on the interior of the rubber bung. By bending the body of the tube in relation to the needle-carrying section, the inner end of the tube leaves its seating and breaks the vacuum. When the pressure on the body is removed, the end of the needle-carrying tube returns to its seating and stays there. Of course, if in the meantime the glass covering of the needle has been filed off and the needle itself inserted in the vein, the blood obviously flows into the tube. When the body of the venule is allowed to resume its original position, the end of the tube is again sealed and the needle may be withdrawn.
Very neat.
And that, I think, is about the best picture I can give you. And I do hope it's been a help.
Well, it certainly has, Doctor, and I'm very, very grateful to you. As a matter of fact, I feel I can almost go straight off now and commit a successful venipuncture myself. What about letting me have a stab at you first, eh, Mr. Watkins?
No, sir. You go home and practice in a hot water bottle. And then I don't mind watching you have a crack at the doctor here.